My name is James Carter, and I built something from nothing. When I was 26 years old, I started a technology consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had graduated from Howard University with honors, worked my way through 3 different corporations, learned everything I could about enterprise software systems, and finally decided I was tired of making other people rich. I wanted to build something of my own. The problem was capital. Banks don't exactly line up to give loans to young black men with big dreams and no collateral. I had a business plan that could have impressed anyone with half a brain. Projections that were conservative and realistic, and a skill set that was worth its weight in gold in the tech industry. But every loan officer I sat across from found some reason to say no. Too risky, not enough history. Come back when you have more experience. That's when I met Bradley Harrison. Bradley was a white man, 5 years older than me, from a family with old money in South Carolina. We met at a networking event in uptown Charlotte, and he seemed genuinely impressed by my ideas. He had an MBA from Duke, connections throughout the Southeast business community, and access to capital that I could only dream about. More importantly, he seemed to believe in what I was trying to build. "Let's do this together," he said over drinks that night. "I'll bring the funding and the connections. You bring the brains and the technical expertise. 50-50 partners." I should have seen the warning signs from the beginning. The first few years were good. We called our company Meridian Tech Solutions, and we grew faster than either of us expected. I was the one doing the actual work, designing systems, managing implementations, training clients, solving the problems that nobody else could solve. Bradley handled the business development side, which mostly meant playing golf with executives and taking clients to expensive dinners. But even in those early days, there were moments that made me uncomfortable. Like the time we were pitching a major healthcare client, and Bradley introduced me as our technical specialist instead of co-founder. Or the way he would interrupt me in meetings whenever I was making a point, then rephrase what I had just said as if it were his own idea. Or how he seemed surprised, genuinely surprised, whenever I demonstrated knowledge about something beyond coding and systems architecture. "You know about wine?" he asked once at a client dinner. His eyebrows raised like I had just performed a magic trick. "I know about a lot of things, Bradley." He laughed it off, but I saw the look in his eyes, the recalculation, the subtle adjustment of whatever mental category he had placed me in. The microaggressions accumulated like drops of water in a bucket. Each one was small enough to dismiss, easy enough to rationalize away. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe this was just how business worked, and I needed to develop thicker skin. But the bucket kept filling. There was the time a client called the office looking for the owner, and Bradley's secretary automatically transferred the call to him instead of asking which owner. There was the board meeting where Bradley suggested we needed to professionalize our image by having him be the primary face of the company at industry conferences. There was the holiday party where one of Bradley's friends asked me if I was the caterer. Bradley apologized for that one. He didn't know, he said. He didn't mean anything by it, but he didn't correct his friend in the moment. He just stood there, drink in hand, and let the assumption hang in the air until I had to identify myself. By our 4th year in business, Meridian Tech Solutions had grown to 40 employees and annual revenue of $12 million. We had offices in Charlotte and Raleigh, clients across 7 states, and a reputation for solving problems that other firms couldn't handle. I had built something real, something valuable, something that proved every loan officer who had turned me down was wrong. That's when Bradley started bringing in his family. First it was his cousin Mitchell, who became our new director of operations, despite having no relevant experience whatsoever. Then it was his brother-in-law Thomas, who was installed as VP of Business Development, even though he couldn't explain what our company actually did. Then it was his college roommate, his neighbor, his father's golf buddy's son. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who looked at me like I didn't belong in my own company. The board meetings changed. Decisions that used to require both of our signatures started happening without my input. Client relationships that I had built over years were being handed off to Bradley's relatives. My access to financial systems became restricted. For security purposes, they said. I tried to address it directly. Bradley, we need to talk about what's happening here. He leaned back in his chair, that familiar condescending smile on his face. What do you mean, James? The new hires, the restructuring. The fact that I'm being cut out of decisions about my own company. Our company, he corrected, and nobody's cutting you out of anything. We're just evolving, growing up. You focus on what you do best, the technical stuff, and let the adults handle the business side. The adults. I was 30 years old. A co-founder with equal equity, and he was telling me to let the adults handle things. I built this company, I said, keeping my voice steady even though every cell in my body wanted to shout. I designed every system we've ever implemented. I solved every problem that made our reputation. Without me, there is no Meridian Tech. Bradley's smile didn't waver. See, this is what I'm talking about, this aggression, this hostility. It makes people uncomfortable, James. It makes clients uncomfortable. Maybe that's why I've been handling more of the face-to-face relationships lately. You come across as threatening. Threatening. There it was, the word that has been used to dismiss black men for centuries. I was 30 years old, wearing a three-piece suit, speaking in measured tones about legitimate business concerns, and I was being called threatening. I knew then that something was very wrong. But I didn't know how wrong until 6 weeks later. I came into the office on a Tuesday morning to find 2 police officers waiting in the lobby. Behind them stood Bradley, his cousin Mitchell, and a man in a grey suit I didn't recognize. "James Carter?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, what's going on?" "You're under investigation for embezzlement and fraud." The world stopped spinning. The man in the grey suit stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, I'm David Whitmore, Corporate Counsel for Meridian Tech Solutions. The board has discovered significant financial irregularities traced to accounts under your control. Approximately $2.3 million has been misappropriated over the past 18 months. I looked at Bradley. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "This is insane," I said. "I haven't stolen anything. I don't even have access to—" "We have documentation," Whitmore interrupted. "Transaction records, authorization codes, email correspondence. The board has voted to terminate your employment effective immediately and to pursue criminal charges." "Terminate my employment?" "I'm a 50% owner of this company." "Were," Bradley finally spoke, his voice smooth and practiced. "The operating agreement contains provisions for removal of a partner engaged in criminal activity. Your shares have been forfeited." I stood there in the lobby of the company I had built, surrounded by people who had decided I was guilty before I had any chance to defend myself, and I understood something with perfect clarity. This was never about the money. This was about taking everything I had built and giving it to people who looked like Bradley. This was about a black man who had gotten too successful, too visible, too threatening to the natural order of things. This was about putting me back in my place. The police didn't arrest me that day. There wasn't enough evidence for that. Not yet, they said. But the damage was done. My name was mud. My reputation was destroyed. My company, had been stolen from me through a carefully orchestrated scheme that I was only beginning to understand. I walked out of that building with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning determination in my chest. They thought they had beaten me. They had no idea what I was capable of. The first 2 weeks after my expulsion from Meridian Tech were the darkest of my life. I moved into a studio apartment in a part of Charlotte I had never wanted to see again. The kind of neighborhood where I had grown up, where my mother had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, where I had sworn I would never return. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. My professional contacts stopped returning my calls. The story had leaked to the local business press, co-founder of tech firm under investigation for fraud, and my name had become synonymous with criminality. I spent those first weeks in something close to shock. I would wake up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, convinced that I was about to be arrested. I would replay every conversation, every meeting, every decision, trying to understand how I had missed what Bradley was planning. I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if somehow, this was my fault. Maybe I should have been more careful. Maybe I should have seen the signs. Maybe I should have known that a black man in America could never truly own anything without someone trying to take it away. But despair is a luxury I couldn't afford. On the 15th day, I got out of bed. I took a shower, put on the last clean suit I owned, and started to fight back. The first thing I needed was information. The criminal investigation was being handled by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, but I knew that the real power lay elsewhere. Bradley had connections, political connections, social connections, the kind of old money network that could make inconvenient problems disappear. If I was going to survive this, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I started by reaching out to the few contacts who were still willing to talk to me. Sarah Chen, our former head of accounting, was one of them. She had left Meridian 6 months earlier, under circumstances that now seemed suspicious. I knew something was wrong, she told me over coffee at a diner far from uptown. The books didn't make sense. There were transfers I couldn't explain, accounts I didn't have access to, signatures that didn't match. When I raised concerns, Bradley told me I was being paranoid. A week later, I was laid off. Restructuring, they called it. Did you keep any documentation? Sarah looked around nervously. Some. Copies of things that didn't add up. I was going to take them to the board. But then I realized the board is all Bradley's people now. His family, his friends, his cronies. There's no one left who would listen. I'll listen. She slid a thumb drive across the table. Be careful, James. These people don't play fair. I spent the next 3 weeks analyzing every document Sarah had saved. What I found was a masterpiece of financial manipulation. Bradley hadn't just stolen from the company. He had constructed an elaborate scheme to make it look like I was the thief. The transfers that supposedly bore my authorization codes had been made using credentials that were created after I lost access to the financial systems. The email correspondence that proved my guilt had been sent from accounts that were set up in my name but registered to IP addresses I had never used. The signatures on the fraudulent documents were forgeries, good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Bradley hadn't just framed me, he had spent months building a case against me, planting evidence, manipulating records, creating a paper trail that pointed directly at the one person who couldn't defend himself. And he had done it all while smiling in my face, calling me partner, pretending we were building something together. The rage I felt was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It was a cold, crystalline fury that settled into my bones and became part of who I was. But I didn't let it control me. Rage without direction is just self-destruction. I needed a plan. The criminal investigation was my most immediate threat. If I was indicted, I would spend years fighting charges that could put me in prison. My entire future would be consumed by a legal battle I might not win, regardless of my innocence. I needed to find a way to make the investigation go away, or at least to shift its focus to the real criminal. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Williams. He was a former FBI agent, a black man about 10 years older than me, who had left the bureau after getting tired of watching cases get buried for political reasons. He understood what I was up against in ways that a white investigator never could. This is a sophisticated operation, Marcus said, after reviewing what I had gathered. Bradley didn't do this alone. He had help, legal help, financial help, maybe law enforcement help. Someone is protecting him. Can you find out who? I can try, but it's going to take time and money, both of which I'm guessing you're short on right now. He was right. My resources were dwindling fast. The legal fees alone were consuming what little savings I had managed to protect. I needed income, but my reputation was destroyed. No one in Charlotte would touch me, so I went underground. I started doing freelance consulting work under an assumed name, solving problems for companies that didn't ask too many questions. It was humiliating, going from co-founder of a $12 million firm to anonymous contractor. But it kept me alive. It kept me in the fight. Meanwhile, Marcus was digging deeper into Bradley's operation. What he uncovered was worse than I had imagined. Bradley Harrison wasn't just a thief. He was a serial predator who had done this before. 20 years earlier, when he was fresh out of business school, he had partnered with another entrepreneur, a Vietnamese immigrant named David Nguyen, to start a software company. 3 years in, David had been accused of embezzlement, forced out of his own company, and eventually deported after his legal status became entangled in the criminal proceedings. Bradley had emerged as the sole owner of a firm that he later sold for $8 million. The pattern was clear. Bradley found talented outsiders, people who had skills but not connections, who needed his money and his access, and he used them to build something valuable. Then, when the time was right, he took it all for himself and destroyed anyone who might challenge his claim. I wasn't his first victim. I was just the latest. "There's more," Marcus told me one evening, his voice grim. "I've been looking into Bradley's current finances. Meridian Tech isn't doing well. Revenue is down 40% since you left. Turns out clients were loyal to you, not to him. Several major contracts have been cancelled. The company is hemorrhaging money." That's not surprising. Mitchell and Thomas couldn't implement a software system if their lives depended on it. Here's where it gets interesting. Bradley has been taking on debt to keep the company afloat. A lot of debt. And he's been cutting corners, failing to deliver on contracts, missing deadlines, billing for work that was never completed. There are at least 3 lawsuits pending against Meridian right now, including one from a hospital system that claims faulty software implementation compromised patient records. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. He's going to destroy the company. He's going to try to sell it before that happens. They found evidence that he's been in talks with a private equity firm out of Atlanta. They're interested in acquiring Meridian's client list and intellectual property. Bradley would walk away with several $1 million, and the new owners would be stuck cleaning up his mess, including the criminal investigation, which would quietly disappear once the acquisition goes through. Bradley gets rich. You stay under a cloud of suspicion forever, and nobody ever knows the truth. That night, I lay awake in my studio apartment and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. Everything I had built was being dismantled by a man who had never created anything in his life. Everything I had worked for was being handed to people who saw me as nothing more than a useful tool to be discarded when convenient. But Bradley had made a mistake. He had assumed that I would accept defeat. He had assumed that the system would protect him, that his money and his connections and his whiteness would be enough to crush me into submission. He had assumed that I was just another victim, too beaten down to fight back. He didn't know me at all. I started building my case. Every document, every email, every transaction record that proved Bradley's fraud, I compiled it all into an airtight package. I tracked down former employees who had been forced out, contractors who had been cheated, clients who had been deceived. I built a network of witnesses who were willing to testify about what they had seen, and then I discovered something that changed everything. The hospital system that was suing Meridian, Health First Regional Network, wasn't just angry about the software failure. They had lost $37 million because of Bradley's negligence, and their lawyers were out for blood. The lawsuit was seeking damages that could potentially bankrupt Meridian entirely, but more importantly, Health First's legal team had uncovered evidence of billing fraud. Bradley had charged them for services that were never rendered, signed off on certifications that were never completed, and covered up security vulnerabilities that put patient data at risk. This wasn't just a civil matter anymore, it was potentially criminal. And that gave me an idea. I reached out to Health First's lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo. She was Nigerian-American, Harvard Law, one of the most respected litigators in the Southeast. When I told her who I was, she agreed to meet. "I know your story," she said when we sat down. "I also know that something doesn't add up. Bradley Harrison doesn't strike me as someone capable of building a successful tech company. But you do. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here to offer you something." "What's that?" "Everything you need to win your case. Documentation proving that Bradley personally authorized the fraudulent billing, testimony from former employees who witnessed the cover-up, technical analysis showing that the security vulnerabilities were known and ignored for months before the breach." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Why would you give this to me?" "Because Bradley took everything from me. My company, my reputation, my future. He did the same thing to someone else 20 years ago. He'll do it again if someone doesn't stop him. You have the resources and the platform to expose him. I don't. And what do you want in return?" I leaned forward. "I want you to destroy him." Patricia studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "I think we can work together, Mr. Carter." The next 6 months were the most intense of my life. Patricia Okonkwo and I formed an alliance that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. She gave me access to Health First's legal resources, investigators, forensic accountants, expert witnesses. In return, I gave her everything I knew about Bradley's operations, his methods, his weaknesses. Together, we built a case that went far beyond a simple billing dispute. But I knew that winning in court wouldn't be enough. Bradley had powerful friends. He had connections to local politicians, to law enforcement, to the business establishment that ran Charlotte behind closed doors. Even if Health First prevailed in their lawsuit, Bradley would find a way to wriggle free. He would sell Meridian, pocket the money, and start over somewhere else with a new victim. I needed something more. I needed to take control of the game itself. That's when I learned about the debt. Marcus Williams had mentioned that Bradley was borrowing heavily to keep Meridian afloat. What he hadn't told me, because he didn't know yet, was that Bradley had made a critical error in his desperation. He had taken a series of short-term loans from a specialized lender in Delaware, using his shares in Meridian as collateral. The interest rates were predatory, the terms were brutal, and Bradley was already in default. The loans had been packaged and sold to a distressed debt fund operated out of New York. And that fund, I discovered, was looking to unload its position. I didn't have the money to buy Bradley's debt outright. But I knew someone who did. His name was William Chen, Sarah Chen's uncle, and one of the most successful Chinese-American investors in the Southeast. He had made his fortune in real estate during the 90s and had since diversified into technology investments. More importantly, he had a personal grudge against Bradley Harrison. "I remember David Nguyen," William told me when I approached him. "We were in the same immigration cohort. Good man, brilliant engineer. Bradley Harrison destroyed his life. I can give you a chance to return the favor." William listened to my proposal. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "You're asking me to buy $3.2 million in distressed debt," he said finally, "on the chance that Bradley Harrison defaults and you can use it to take control of his company. I'm asking you to invest in justice." William smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "Tell me more." "The deal took 3 weeks to complete. William Chen purchased the debt through a holding company that couldn't be traced back to either of us. On paper, it looked like a routine transaction, a New York fund offloading a troubled asset to a Delaware LLC. No one at Meridian had any idea what was coming. Meanwhile, the Health First lawsuit was proceeding through the courts. Patricia had filed for expedited discovery, citing evidence of ongoing fraud. Bradley's lawyers were fighting back, but they were losing ground. Every document they tried to suppress only made them look more guilty. Every witness they tried to discredit only strengthened the case against them. Then came the deposition. Bradley Harrison had been avoiding direct testimony for months, hiding behind lawyers and corporate shields, but Patricia finally cornered him. On a cold Tuesday morning in January, he was required to sit in a conference room and answer questions under oath. I wasn't allowed to be in the room, but Patricia made sure I received a transcript that same evening. "Mr. Harrison, did you personally authorize the billing statements submitted to Health First Regional Network? I may have signed some documents. I signed a lot of documents. Did you review those documents before signing them?" "I trust my team to handle the details." "Your team? You mean the team led by Mitchell Harrison?" "Your cousin, the same Mitchell Harrison who has no background in technology or healthcare compliance. Mitchell is a quick learner. Mr. Harrison, I'm showing you Exhibit 47. This is an email dated March 15th of last year, sent from your personal account to your CFO. In this email, you instruct him to, and I quote, bill for the full implementation even though the security module isn't finished yet. We can patch it later, they'll never know the difference. Can you explain this email? Silence. Mr. Harrison, I'd like to consult with my attorney. It went on like that for 6 hours. Bradley squirmed, deflected, contradicted himself and ultimately admitted, under oath, that he had knowingly misrepresented Meridian's services to Health First. He had committed fraud, and now it was on the record. But the deposition wasn't the killing blow. That came 2 weeks later. Bradley's debt came due on February 1st. He had been scrambling to refinance, to find new investors, to sell the company before the walls closed in. But the private equity firm had backed out after the Health First lawsuit went public. The banks wouldn't touch him. His family's money was tied up in trusts that his father controlled, and his father, finally seeing his son for what he really was, had refused to help. On February 2nd, William Chen's holding company filed for foreclosure. I was there when the notice was served. I'd spent many nights imagining this moment. I had pictured Bradley's face when he realized what was happening, when he understood that the trap had closed around him. I had wondered if I would feel satisfaction or triumph or some sense of cosmic justice being served. What I actually felt was much simpler. I felt free. Bradley was in the lobby of Meridian's headquarters, my headquarters. The building I had helped design, the company I had built from nothing, when the process server found him. He was surrounded by his usual entourage, Mitchell, Thomas, the lawyers, the yes men who had propped him up for years. "Bradley Harrison?" the server asked. "Yes?" "You've been served." Bradley took the papers, confusion spreading across his face. I watched from across the lobby as he read the first page, then the second, then flipped frantically through the rest of the document. His face went pale. His hands started to shake. "This is impossible," he said. "This debt was sold months ago. I was told—" "You were told what you wanted to hear," I said. Bradley looked up. When he saw me standing there, his expression cycled through shock, confusion, and finally, fear. "James, what is this?" I walked toward him slowly, savoring every step. "This is consequences, Bradley. Something you've managed to avoid for your entire life. I don't understand. Let me explain it to you. 6 months ago, you took out $3.2 million in high-interest loans, using your Meridian shares as collateral. You were desperate. The company was failing without me. Your investors were backing out, and you needed cash to keep the lights on long enough to find a buyer. You thought you were being clever. How do you know about that? I know everything. Bradley, I know about the fraud. I know about the forged documents. I know about David Nguyen. I know about every dirty trick you've pulled for the past 20 years. His face went white. David Nguyen, that was different. It was exactly the same. You find talented people who need your money and your connections. You use them to build something valuable, then you destroy them and take everything for yourself. You've done it your whole life. But you made a mistake this time. What mistake? You underestimated me. I let that sink in for a moment. The debt you defaulted on, I own it now, through a holding company that a friend of mine was kind enough to set up. Which means I own the collateral, your shares in Meridian, which means, as of about 30 minutes ago, I own this company. The lobby had gone completely silent. Mitchell, Thomas, the lawyers, everyone was staring at me like I had just performed a magic trick, which, in a way, I had. You can't do this, Bradley said, his voice rising. This is illegal. This is theft. It's completely legal. I had very good lawyers check, the same lawyers, incidentally, who are currently preparing to file criminal charges against you for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The same evidence you manufactured to frame me. It's going to put you in prison. I'll fight this. I have connections. You have nothing. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Your father has cut you off. Your investors have abandoned you. Your lawyers are about to be disbarred for their role in framing an innocent man. The police investigation into my supposed embezzlement, it's been redirected to you based on evidence that your own former accountant provided. I could see it in his face. The moment when he realized that there was no escape, no connections to call, no money to spend, no lies that would save him. For the first time in his privileged life, Bradley Harrison was going to face consequences. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why go through all this trouble? You could have just walked away, started over somewhere else. I thought about that question. I had thought about it many times over the past year. The easy answer was revenge. Simple, satisfying, human revenge. But that wasn't the whole truth. Do you know what it's like to build something from nothing? I asked. To work twice as hard as everyone else, to be twice as good, to do everything right, and still have people assume you don't belong? Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and see people looking at you like you're a threat, like you're a criminal, like you couldn't possibly have earned your place at the table? Bradley didn't answer. I've lived that my entire life, every single day, and I made my peace with it because I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself enough, it would eventually be enough. That the world would see me for who I am instead of what they assume I am. I shook my head slowly. But it's never enough, is it? You can build a company from scratch, solve problems that no one else can solve, create millions of dollars in value, and there will always be someone like you, ready to take it away, ready to call you aggressive, ready to call you threatening, ready to frame you for crimes you didn't commit because they know that the system will believe them over you. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I didn't do this for revenge, Bradley. I did this because I refused to let people like you win. I did this because somewhere out there's another young black entrepreneur who's going to face the same prejudice, the same obstacles, the same betrayal. And I want them to know that it's possible to fight back, that it's possible to beat the system at its own game, that they don't have to accept defeat just because that's what's expected of them. I stepped back and straightened my tie. Security will escort you out of the building. Your personal belongings will be shipped to whatever address you provide. I suggest you find a good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. Bradley looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I watched as security led him out of the building that had been mine all along, even when my name wasn't on the door. The building that I had built with my own hands, my own mind, my own determination. The building that I had finally reclaimed. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I restructured Meridian Tech from the ground up, removing every trace of Bradley's corruption and incompetence. I reached out to former employees who had been driven away, offering them their jobs back with apologies and raises. I reconnected with clients who had left, assuring them that the company was under new management. I hired Sarah Chen as my CFO, giving her the authority she should have had all along. Bradley Harrison was indicted on 12 counts of fraud, 4 counts of conspiracy, and 2 counts of perjury. His trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I didn't attend the sentencing. I had already moved on. Patricia Okonkwo and I celebrated with dinner at a restaurant I had always wanted to try but could never afford before. Over wine that cost more than my first month's rent in that studio apartment. We talked about what came next. "You could do anything," she said. "You've got the company back. You've got your reputation restored. You've got more money than you know what to do with. What are you going to do with it?" I thought about my mother, who had worked 2 jobs her entire life so that I could have opportunities she never had. I thought about David Nguyen, who had been destroyed by the same man who tried to destroy me. I thought about all the young black entrepreneurs who were facing the same obstacles I had faced, fighting the same battles, being told the same lies about what they could and couldn't achieve. "I'm going to build something," I said. "Something bigger than just a company, a foundation maybe, scholarships for students who look like me, investment capital for entrepreneurs who can't get bank loans, legal support for people who've been framed by men like Bradley Harrison." Patricia smiled. "That sounds like a lot of work." Good thing I'm not afraid of work. I walked home that night through the streets of uptown Charlotte. The same streets where I'd once felt like an outsider, a pretender, someone who didn't belong. The same streets where Bradley Harrison had taken everything from me. But the streets hadn't changed. I had. I was James Carter, a black man in America, with all the weight and complexity that carried. I had been underestimated, discriminated against, betrayed, and nearly destroyed. And I had survived. I had fought back. I had won. Not because the system was fair. It wasn't. Not because justice always prevails. It doesn't. I had won because I refused to give up. Because I was smarter than they expected, stronger than they assumed, more determined than they could possibly imagine. Because I had taken every insult, every injustice, every obstacle they had thrown at me, and I had used it as fuel. There would be more battles ahead. There always are, for people who look like me. But I was ready for them. I had learned that victory doesn't come from waiting for the world to change. It comes from changing it yourself. One fight at a time. I thought about something my mother used to say when I was growing up. "They'll try to break you," she would tell me. "They'll try to make you small. Don't let them. Don't ever let them." I never did, and I never will.